What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Allebach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. For today's episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Eiynah. Eiynah is a Pakistani-Canadian blogger, illustrator, and podcaster herself who grew up in Saudi Arabia. I came across her work via an episode she had done with Sam Harris over the topic of Islam and the sphere of public figures conversing about it as a whole. So I did a deep dive and found her social critiques incredibly valuable. She's one of the few people who vocally criticizes Islam as an ideology and won't back down from controversy around the religious culture she was raised in, but at the same time, she doesn't cut any slack to anti-Muslim bigotry, which is a slippery slope often found in the circles of individuals who build careers off criticizing the religion. In our conversation, we went through the movement of the intellectual dark web, of how it came to be, who some of the key players are, and why they're problematic. Both Eiynah and I spent a ton of time in this internet culture, so a lot of sentiment we share in this episode is from years of closely observing characters like Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, Maajid Nawaz, Sam Harris, or Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who have really spearheaded this new tribal conglomerate of centrist, neocon, libertarian, alt-light, alt-right, and straight-up fascist groups who all rally behind them based off of some of the harmful rhetoric and underlying messages they put out around this whole topic. So yeah, like I said before, Eiynah's work as a social critic of this movement has been so valuable to me in deconstructing my biases and just consistently reminding me to stay critical of powerful figureheads who drum up influence in large groups like the intellectual dark web. If you Google search her name and Patreon, you can find her page and donate to her work, where she gives out personalized cards, shout-outs, illustrations, and more, even if you can only do $1 a month. It was great getting to talk with Eiynah about all this, and agree or disagree, I hope you can take something from it. Now let's get into what's really good. Eiynah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so just to get us started here, can you give some of your brief backstory on your upbringing and just how your work in art and blogging got started?
So I'm an ex-Muslim of Pakistani background. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, which was quite an experience. I had a Western education. I guess you can tell that from my accent. Then I moved to Canada, and now I'm in Canada. I started off by writing about and drawing about sexuality in the Muslim world. Then I've never been a fan of religion. Since I've been like a teenager, I've never been a fan of religion. I guess
the natural rebellious phase of...
Yeah. So, when I would talk about sexuality, it was very hard to keep that out of the conversation. I knew I was catering to a mostly Pakistani audience, and I knew that once I started criticizing religion, I'd alienate a lot of my audience. But it was really hard to talk about sexuality and the oppression that women face in countries like Pakistan, and not mention the impact that religion has on that. That took me into the online atheist scene, which in the beginning felt great. Like, hey, there's a community of people that, I don't have to be afraid to speak my mind in front of. We all don't like religion, and that's okay. And there's other ex-Muslims out there like me. And, it was a great feeling at first. And then as I got more and more involved in it, I started to notice some troubling patterns, and it turned into from criticizing religion fairly to making ridiculous comparisons like circumcision is worse than the Holocaust, and Judaism is worse than Nazism, and worrying about Muslims breeding and then using that all to like demonize Muslim immigrants, which, I consider myself like I am an immigrant of Muslim background. My family's Muslim. I don't think we've done anything to harm the country that we immigrated to. So, it's just that stuff didn't sit well with me, and it got worse and worse as it got like endorsed by the bigger names, and seeing Douglas Murray being promoted by Sam Harris. And I even tried to, give Sam the benefit of doubt and reach out to him a few times. I had him on my podcast. I talked to him about his associations with people like that and Rubin. And it seemed he was full of a bunch of excuses, and he played kind of like, oh, I don't really know enough about this stuff. But after I had pointed out specifics to him, he went and started supporting Rubin on Patreon and
so ridiculous.
Continued to promote him. And recently in an interview, he also stated that he specifically admires Rubin's interview style.
Yeah, because he just lets some people talk and say whatever they want, I guess.
Not just people, just specifically like far-right hacks.
Yeah.
He had like far-left crazies on to balance things out, and he would just let everyone speak, and I'd be like, okay, maybe he's got a consistent sort of unbiased way of just letting crazies talk.
Right. So, like, when do you think the shift started to happen with all this? Because, like, where I kind of gathered, it seemed like there was a sort of lulling period where new atheism kind of had died down for a bit the past few years, and you didn't really hear much from a lot of these these major figures. And then it seemed to me, at least, that a lot of the rise came post Gamergate, and then a lot of these voices started to become amplified with the election cycle coming up into 2016. And it was really weird. Like, how do you think some of these major associations, like say a Sam Harris, was it just the religious topic that he's been covering for his whole career virtually? Like, do you think that was the thing that's brought him into this crowd of sort of alt-right characters?
I mean, that's definitely a gateway, but I think also the whole anti-left, anti-SJW stuff, that's where that leads, right? There's plenty of fair internal criticisms that of the left that can be made genuinely by leftists, but this is not that, even though it poses as that. It's increasingly obvious that this is just anti-leftism in a time of an increasingly empowered far right.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest issues myself, and I know you and a lot of the people who have followed this whole thing the past few years are seeing, is that you had a character like a Dave Rubin burst onto the scene in 2014 or 15, whenever it was, and his entire shtick was this YouTube series of presenting himself as someone from the left, and that he was essentially saying, oh, this is my way of cleaning up my own house. This is me cleaning up my own party. And that's sort of the rhetoric that a lot of these characters have fallen behind, including ones like Jordan Peterson and Sam, where they kind of hide behind that guise of, oh, well, we believe in legalizing marijuana, like we believe in abortion, like we believe in sort of name your traditional liberal held belief, and they'll say those things, but
but conservatism has changed too. You know what I mean?
So like the scales have been sliding in that direction already. Like it's almost like, even though gay marriage was just legalized a few years ago in the U.S., that issue is it's not even really a benchmark anymore of telling you if someone's conservative or liberal. It's almost expected. So
I mean, things are going backwards now, though, right? So
it's going all directions. But I mean, I think that's the thing people get caught up in, though. A lot of the fans, at least, of these characters, where when you bring this critique up to them, that's the sort of padded answer they go to, and they ignored the fact that the vast majority, I mean, I would go as far to say is 80, 90+% of the rhetoric that all these individuals put out there, it's all leftist critique, and it's all hyperbole, generalization. It's all the things that they claim to be against. Also,
I mean, if at the same time they had some really harsh criticisms of the right, then maybe you could buy their story, but they don't. All they have is excuses for the right, downplaying the right, and, saying that the left is the biggest threat, campus SJWs.
Well, that's what initially drew me so much to your work, because, a lot of what you're doing is you're riding that line between those who are partaking in anti-Muslim bigotry on the right side of the spectrum, and then those on the left side of the spectrum who are just more apologists for Islam as a whole,
Yeah.
So, can you describe how that process has evolved for you and what the tension's been like in terms of building an audience? Because we all know, there's a cash cow in this whole intellectual dark web circle of people, and just on the right in general, as far as anti-Muslim sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, I could be rolling in it if I would just...
You fit the profile.
Yeah, if I could just use I'm an ex-Muslim woman from Saudi Arabia, and, Muslim immigrants are so bad, don't trust them at all.
Right, but you don't fit. But it is interesting, because, you are also very critical of those on the left, like a Reza Aslan character, who's just completely lets the ideology slide anytime it comes into the mainstream after some major event or something. So, what's that been like for you the past couple of years of trying to cultivate a community and an audience for your work? Because it's not really, riding that tension is not really something that's popular for people.
No, it's been very hard, actually, because either I'm alienating people on the left who think I'm too harsh, or I had someone call me alt-right the other day.
Wow.
For criticizing the face veil, And as a woman who's grown up in a theocracy and had to encounter morality police walking around with their canes, I'm sorry, I'm going to fucking criticize forced modesty.
Right.
So, but I will say, though, that this whole concept that, the left are apologists for Islamic extremism, that's been exaggerated in the atheist scene as well. I do come across it sometimes. There are some people who'll be like, what's your problem? Why don't you just let little baby girls wear their hijabs to school? And I'm like, I'm not stopping them, but I'm going to say that that's inappropriate. They're children. So occasionally I'll come across people like that. They are coming at it from a well-meaning place. They just want people to leave minorities alone and not criticize them at all. But I mean, that's how everyone progresses, right? And the other side are not coming at it from a good place, and they want basically Islam to be eradicated. So it's a frustrating spot to be in the middle, where you want good faith criticism of Islam to happen. You want progress within your own communities. You want tolerance to increase, but you're getting pressure from anti-Muslim bigots who will use your voice no matter what you say, or you'll get pressure from people who will call you alt-right for no bloody reason. Half the time I'm fighting and ridiculing the alt-right, so it's a ridiculous accusation.
Yeah, and I feel like the skeptic community, almost by nature, it's full of a lot more people who have that sort of contrarian mindset. So when they look at the broader cultural conversations happening, I think because maybe for some of them, when they look at who's on the right and who's, the religious right maniacs and the people who are just pundits for Donald Trump or whatever, they see that. And this is the whole excuse I think they build in their mind is, oh, well, that's really obvious, and people are obviously reporting on that, but it's the left that is sort of the underlooked and undercovered boogeyman that, we need to criticize.
Maybe, right? But when you're in a time like this Trumpian era and you see hate crimes rising and stuff like that, and still your focus is only on the left, I mean, you're ridiculous then.
Yeah, it becomes this weird thing where there's this constant comparison back and forth between fascists and then Antifa. And I think at the heart of what people are meaning when they try to make these weird comparisons is that, okay, there's good and bad actors on both sides, and there's people who are calling for violence on both sides. And okay, that, if that's your intent, then I can at least see where you're coming from, because you're giving me that angle. But when you look at what's actually happening, who's actually being harmed, the hate crimes have gone up. It's not really a even-keeled scale when you look left to right in this way. But because
Exactly. And the right wing stuff is so well funded, right? They
yeah,
have all these like organizations trying to take over on campus and say all this, push all this like right wing crap. The leftists, they don't have anything comparable to that. And in fact, I find even on a smaller scale, like right wing people are so willing to support anyone that's giving them legitimacy in their viewpoints, right? Because they're so looking for that. And on the left, people just expect it out of basic decency. No one's going to be like, "Yay, you champion diversity. Let me like fund
yeah.
you." It's kind of like, well, yeah, that's what good people should be doing. So there's a disparity in that way too. That's why you see like anyone sort of, pushing these right-leaning talking points is getting so much funding, even on their Patreons.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's a combination of that where I think the baseline standard of expectations is higher on the left automatically because of that, because of the more progressive ideology. It's just it expects more from people to be decent, and at the same time, it's also there's so many different areas where people are punching up and trying to fight for a different set of rights. So like you have your people fighting for feminist rights, you have people fighting for black rights, like you have all these sub movements that are kind of going, they're in lockstep with each other in a lot of ways, but at the same time they're fighting for like the attention of the mainstream. So like from the outside looking in, it gives that perception of, oh, the left is eating itself. Whereas it's more just there's a lot of different tribal identities on the left, all working toward similar goals for different people groups. Whereas the right
and it's also about principles, right? Like if you're willing to let your principles slide, then it will appear that definitely the right is happy to work with anyone, even people like, say, for example, Richard Spencer would welcome people of color or gay people that are willing to push his ethno-state talking points, right? Whereas if he were to stick to his principles of white supremacy, he would probably not be okay working with people of color, right?
Yeah.
Same way, there are homophobes like Prager who are happy to use people like Rubin to push his bullshit.
Yeah, like he had directly said in that one interview with him, like one of their fireside chats or whatever. He's like, I want you to keep doing what you're doing, keep calling yourself a liberal.
A leftist.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of people in this space that are just becoming almost useful idiots for the right in the way they push this. But
so then having principles goes against you in that way because you're like, okay, well, you represent everything that I'm against. Why should I work with you to put, even if you're willing to push my talking points? I'm not willing to work with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so that happens on the left often. So people say that, oh, that's the left eating itself, but really it's people having more principles and drawing lines because of them.
Yeah, it's just a different expectation. So like when we're looking on the broader level of all of this, like where do you think this whole intellectual dark web movement originated from, and like how do you define where it is right now? Like I know we talked about like post Gamergate and all this anti SJW culture before all this, but like is it more like that is just the tribal identity that they're gathering around? It's more what they're against than what they're for? Like is that where it came from, you think?
Yeah, it's definitely an anti-left tribal group.
Yeah, it's really
that's what really binds a lot of them, right? Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris may not agree on other stuff, but they agree on what matters most to them both right now.
Yeah, it's like you read my mind. That's literally the example that I was trying to conjure up. Just the fact when they did that recent special on Ben Shapiro's new channel, and I was thinking, as I was watching it, I was just thinking, it is so absurd to think how 10 years ago, if this was one of these old school atheist Christian debates, these guys would hate each other, and they have almost nothing in common, but they find these little threads to hang on to, and then that's what drives the audience, because that's...
But it shows what their priorities are, right? Like even if they disagree on the God stuff, they're more than happy to bond with each other on the anti-left stuff.
Okay, so looking at what you're doing right now, in a lot of the discussions you're having about this topic as a whole, you're deconstructing it. the way I'm looking at it is that it's like you're deconstructing the deconstructionists. These people, like Sam or Jordan Peterson or Dave Rubin, like these are all people who, in their mind, they've identified some type of cultural problem, whether it's Islam or SJWs or postmodernism or whatever they're thinking it is. And now, like after they've been around for a little bit, we have people like you who are starting to develop these really authentic, good public critiques of them. So, I mean, where this is all at right now, like how important do you see your role of critiquing what they're doing to be?
I mean, I'm such a small voice, right? I can't compete with the pro Sam voices because they have the backing of the IDW and they get the retweets and they get the followings. And,
Right.
if I were to write a piece on why brown people are at fault for racism against them, then maybe I'd get a Sam retweet too. Like, like the recent article he retweeted by this guy called, Coleman or something? I don't know.
Yeah, this young kid, right?
Yeah. Really, he's becoming so predictable. So, I mean, I'm doing my best, and I think I'm reaching some people, but obviously I don't have the reach that I could have had if I had joined the other side. But, we can't leave them unchallenged, so at least there's someone and something and some people trying to challenge it.
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, just when I'm looking at your work and the podcast and the blogs that you've put out and even just your Twitter presence and all this, like you're saying, it has that almost David Goliath feel to it where, obviously the following disparity is huge between, these funded, very organized groups that back all the Patreons of characters like Sam or Dave Rubin or Jordan Peterson. But, simultaneously, you see a lot of these like anonymous Twitter accounts that are really great at critiquing this movement that have been growing at a pretty fast rate. Ones like Krang T. Nelson or Peter Norway.
Yeah,
some of these ones.
Great.
Yeah, they're awesome. But it's like it's so indicative, I feel like, of where this whole thing is headed, because I think a lot of the people who follow those accounts are people who come from similar backgrounds to maybe myself or you, where they did grow up in some capacity following this scene of people, and somewhere along the way, they started to pick up on these cues where it was going a direction that wasn't what it originally was all about. So it is really important. Like there's not a lot of people doing it, but I do feel like it's a growing, people are starting to rally behind folks like you and like what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. I hope that's true. But see, my problem is also that a lot of my audience is from me being an ex-Muslim, right? So say someone like Peter Norway doesn't have that. And that's actually a problem for me, because people who follow me who just fetishize ex-Muslims, even though I have never put it in my bio that I'm an ex-Muslim for that specific reason, they kind of tend to be like the more pro-Sam, pro-IDW kind of crowd. So even though I would have like a larger follower account than someone else, I would get less retweets because half of my follows are like hate follows, maybe,
Right, yeah. I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, like even just your identity in this situation is so polarizing because of how people perceive it from a even just a social media perspective. On Twitter, you get the recommended follows, and like there's all the ex-Muslim atheist type crowd follows, and you just get lumped in then.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm nothing like them, so I'd have a book deal or two if I was.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You'd be on some New York Times bestseller list, and it'd be a whole different story.
Right.
Well,
I'd be on a New York Times bestseller list about my book about why Peterson is so great for feminism.
Yep. You and Ayaan Hirsi Ali would be doing dinner dates.
That's right.
Probably have a podcast together. So, I mean, okay, sort of along this whole line of thought, one of the things that I've been noticing more and more, and luckily it's been picked up satirically more and more by some of these anonymous Twitter accounts, is this whole intellectual dark web fetishizing of intellectualism.
Yeah.
Like I've been seeing, like, not just between people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, where when they do these events, you have their own peers, like Brett Weinstein or Joe Rogan or whoever these are, people being like, these are the greatest intellectuals of our time. But you also have the fans then projecting that exact same idea. So, I mean...
Oh, yeah. They like, if you look in the forums, like, oh, my God, these were like two intellectual surgeons or like, you know, these genius brain black belts. And it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like their own, it's like, it's just like a weird fetish. Like, it feels very sexualized almost in how they talk about them. Like, it's like their thing that they're getting so... They wait all week to hear like these podcasts and these events, and it is just like really.
And they pay ridiculous prices. Like one of the Sam Harris events was like, I don't know, $490 a ticket or something. I don't know who these idiots are, honestly.
I know. Well, okay. So it's weird because part of me. I get torn on this because part of me thinks it's a lot of people who are intellectually curious. So, like, I don't want to totally trash them all the time because in my mind I'm thinking, okay, you're interested in these topics. You found this.
So listen to it on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why are you paying $400? Well, then it becomes this whole cult thing, right? So it's
exactly. So when you take it to that level, then I think you deserve a little bit of mockery.
Yeah, I agree. I swear, like so many of them, they're suffering from like the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes, that's basically what the IDW is.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, because it's just like obviously there's measurable scales to a lot of this stuff. Like when I look at myself and how I perceive information and what I think about the world, I have no like grandiose perception of me being some intellectual. But so similarly, I know that someone like a Sam Harris is probably a few notches up in as far as like how he retains information and all that. But like when you look at him or a Jordan Peterson or any of these characters, they're at the end of the day, they're public communicators. They're not experts in their field. They're not like Sam Harris is not like a notable neuroscientist. Like Jordan Peterson is not like an expert in like Jungian archetypes. Like these are people who they're really interested in a topic. They do a lot of research. They have some credibility, but like it's sort of this mishmash of a lot of different skill sets that allows them to do what they do versus someone who is on the ground in the lab doing the research who probably doesn't have the same like cultish personality to them to draw in.
I think being a good speaker, being very eloquent is a great tool that they have. Like Jordan Peterson is a bit of a nonsense speaker, but he uses a lot of multisyllabic words which impress these Dunning-Kruger people. So, I mean, they think he's a good speaker. I genuinely do think that Sam Harris is a good and convincing speaker. It's a shame he's using his powers for evil and not good.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in to get some of your thoughts on, because I know you've been through the motions on, like, you're someone who's following these people's every podcast, show, tweet. You're up on all of, like, what's currently happening with them. So I think
a little less now. Like I honestly, I can't listen to Sam's show anymore. I'm so done with it.
Because you just find yourself just criticizing it while you're listening, and then it just drives you insane.
It's so boring, and it's the same shit all the time. It's like, you know, how he was wronged by the left, and how, I don't know, if Islam is bad, how, it's like the same stuff.
Yeah, it becomes so predictable. Like I was just listening to your recent podcast with Michael Brooks and how he brought up that article that Robert Wright had written the other month. That was one of the tipping points for me, where when I saw Sam's knee-jerk Twitter response to that, it really, that was so telling to me, like, of how far down this hole he's gone, because that was such a well-written, well-thought-out piece.
And fair.
It was very fair. And, like, Robert, he's done shows with Sam. Like, he knows he's someone that really does try his best to paint people in the fairest light. He's a good guy, and it was really disheartening to see his immediate deflection of all the criticism that was in that.
Yeah. I mean, and also he didn't quite understand what tribalism was, which was strange. He seems to think it's either race or, Like this
Right.
anti-left tribalism. They don't seem to understand that that's what binds them, because they'll be like, well, Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris are so different, like one is an atheist and one is a, religious person. And it's like, well, that's not what they're being tribal about.
Yeah, it sort of fits in with the way they define and work within the realm of identity politics, where they classify identity politics mostly as propping up somebody's race or gender as a means to either justify or silence somebody's speech.
Which they do.
But they do it. Yeah, it's like they'll come out and say, oh, we hate when someone says as a black person or as a Muslim, but simultaneously they're propping up people like Maajid Nawaz or Ayaan, who base so much of what they're putting out there on their identity in this way. It is just really, it's really difficult to navigate even the nuances of words like that, because words like, or terms like identity politics become hijacked by this group and the way they're defining it. And it's like, how do you even navigate the use of a term like that anymore?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, from the outside looking in, like, a lot of the people I talk to day to day, they aren't really following this stuff.
Same. Lucky people.
Right. Yeah. Like, but they're getting the tail end of it. So, like, they're not.
Exactly.
So they're getting, like, the repercussions without really understanding what's underneath everything. So, like, I wanted to get a little bit of your thoughts on, like, how in some of the rhetoric that, like, say a Peterson, when he made the enforced monogamy comments, or even like recently, like I just read that Sam on his AMA was talking about how he wouldn't talk to a Ta-Nehisi Coates because he's like worried it would devolve into identity politics, while he's totally willing to talk to Charles Murray for and prop him up. So, like,
and at another place, in another podcast, he said that Ta-Nehisi Coates cares about race as much as David Duke, or something ridiculous.
Oh my gosh! So it's like, I don't even know what to do with that.
It's like, do you not understand the difference between a white supremacist caring about race and someone who is discriminated against on the basis of their race, trying to fight for their rights?
Yeah.
Very, very different.
Exactly, but he's not taking the time to present that in any meaningful way. So, like,
deliberately, he can't be that stupid.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. I mean, that's kind of like one of these reoccurring themes where you've talked about in the past, where like you just mentioned how you presented, like, the whole issue with Douglas Murray originally. Like, there's these specific instances where it's either Douglas or someone like a Tommy Robinson, and there's or a Stefan Molyneux. It's like there's evidence of these characters on the internet that would not take somebody very long to look into, to see, like, okay, this is where they stand on these issues. And it's really, it gets...
But I have verbally presented Sam with specific examples, and he's had nothing but really weak excuses.
Yeah, like, how much further can you...
And then he goes on to support them. It's not like, oh, he took what I said and did his own research. No. He just goes on support. He just retweeted, like, defenses of Tommy Robinson, like, recently, after Tommy Robinson has broken the law.
Yeah, it's like, how far do you take these? Like, how far do you take these excuses? How far can you push ignorance on a topic when there's just an overwhelming amount of evidence being pushed in your face on a daily basis? And also, it's such like a weird space to be in, where this is somebody who is basically making... These are all people who are making their entire careers based off of cultural criticisms, and they're not able to take criticisms themselves. Like, they're not able to hear from the outside, this is where you're missing the point. This is where you may have gotten this wrong.
Because they know where they're missing the point. They're doing it deliberately.
Yeah. So when do you think that started to happen? Because, like, you're someone we've been talking about here. You were a fan of Sam. You were into the movement of atheism as it was happening. So, like, when was this a money thing? Like, when do you think this sort of weird shift started to happen, where a lot of these characters in this space just lost some of their integrity along the way?
I think when it became really obvious, like, that's my marker, is always Dave Rubin.
Right.
When he plopped onto the scene, I knew it was going to be bad, and he's since been Rubinizing everyone.
Yeah, he's like this toxic magnet of just access journalism. Like, I still, to this day, I don't know how he got Sam for his first episode. It's a weird thing to like consider that Sam in a lot of ways really built his show from the very beginning. You know, like he didn't really have any kind of platform. Like he was just some nobody from the Young Turks and came over to YouTube for his own show, and out of nowhere, just all these people start just filling his cup with different appearances and all that.
Well, because his identity is right. Yeah, like he's this gay, supposed liberal who just spouts far-right talking points and wants to legitimize the right and bash on the left. Once people pick up on that, that's so perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it just becomes another tool for the right when it comes to what he's actually speaking rhetorically about. So one of the issues that I come into in my real life, not online life, is when people, like I'll have friends who know that I'm interested in these characters. So say 4 years ago when Dave Rubin first came out onto the scene, I was sharing Dave Rubin videos like with Sam Harris with my friends and be like, hey, check this out. So like now, years later, I have a lot of people who are just kind of, you know, they're like lay people as far as their interest in politics and social issues and all that, but they'll get into like a new podcast or a new YouTube show, whatever, and they'll actually share with me, oh, like I just checked out this Dave Rubin video, or I just checked out this Jordan Peterson video, and my knee-jerk reaction to that is just like, stop, like get away, like stop right where you are, like don't take it any further. And it's this really weird space to be in, because where they're coming from, it's just a space of curiosity. They're like, oh,
well, you know how it can like radicalize people, right?
Yes.
So you've seen that, so you're concerned.
Yeah. So it puts you in this really weird position, because I don't know, like when you look at this movement as a whole, like if you were just like a person from the outside looking in who didn't know much about these characters, do you see any benefit to any of the people in it? Like say like a Steven Pinker or a Dan Carlin, or like are there any like honest actors that you see within this circle of individuals that you're able to point to? Or
I've honestly lost a lot of respect for Steven Pinker too. I mean, his endorsements for things like Quillette and saying shit like, you know, what was it that he said? That political correctness is red pilling America. Like, fuck off.
Oh,
that's
I didn't even see that.
That's an alt-right talking point. And he was doing it for some Coke video, not Coca-Cola, Coke funded.
Oh, geez. Yeah, like those Learn Liberty.
Yeah, I think it was Learn Liberty. Yeah.
People never believe me about that when I try to like show them. I'm like, look, this is where you can just literally follow the money trail. Just follow it. It's right in front of you. Just.
And he cites like Christina Hoff Sommers in his books, you know, to discredit, I don't know, feminists and stuff. It's just, I don't know. If you're using Christina Hoff Sommers as a reliable source on rape stats and things like that, you're just disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, okay, this is like a weird gray area regarding the actual, what I would call like fascists and neo-Nazis and white supremacists that are existing and growing within the sort of fringes of this movement, from people like Molyneux and like Robinson and these characters. So like we know those exist, and we know that there's a growing number of them. We can see it online. You can see the presence popping up in pockets around the Western world. But like I've heard, I think it was David Pakman at some point recently. He was talking about this, and he was a little bit hesitant to say like how sizable the actual movement is, because it's hard to tell like how it translates into real life. So like when you look at the online, like what you know of the online culture and what you see like in the public space of news and what's happening around you and the people that you know, how much do you see of like the trolling and the provocateurs and the neo-Nazis and this sort of weird mishmash of characters online? Like how much of that do you think translates into reality, into real life?
Well, I mean, it is happening in the real world. So I, dismiss the idea that we shouldn't take it seriously because it's all internet stuff.
Right.
But obviously I don't come across neo-Nazis every day in real life.
Yeah.
But I have started hearing about events like in Toronto, like far-right events, like Nazi rallies and shit like that. I have seen like hate posters, and I have heard of hate crimes happening to people I know. Like, you know, one of my friend's moms got spat at because she was speaking Hebrew. And just like, I would never hear that stuff or see that stuff ever before. You know, my parents got yelled at a coffee store to go back to where they came from.
Wow.
These kinds of things didn't used to happen. And now we've elected like a far-right Trumpy premier for our province as well.
Yeah.
So it's definitely having an impact. It's definitely happening here too.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of, I guess the way I'm thinking about it in these terms is it almost becomes a defining issue and then a highlighting issue, because similarly to what the people in the intellectual dark web choose to highlight and choose to not talk about, in this same way, I guess, it kind of becomes an issue of what are you focusing on? I guess the way I'm framing the question, I'm trying to think of it like, do you feel like social media and like the presence of a lot of what we see online via trolls and, you know, hateful comments and literal hate speech from fascists and all that, like how much of that is real, even in the framing of that, and almost, I guess.
Well, I had an acquaintance like back from university who I was Facebook friends with, and he was like, before my eyes, becoming worse and worse, like always sharing InfoWars, sharing like Paul Joseph Watson, sharing anti-Muslim stuff. And it was just like, what the hell happened to this dude? He was not like this. You know, he loves Milo Yiannopoulos. Now people that I know are just starting to learn about characters like Milo Yiannopoulos. So I think that all this will eventually reach them too, but maybe 2-3 years down the line, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the issue. It's all framing. It's all framing and how like we actually talk about, you know, what we want to focus on right now. Because I could very easily ask you, in that same regard, like you just mentioned that story. Like I could say, well, do you feel like social media is blowing this out of proportion? But even when you ask a question like that and you focus on it in that way, it's basically dismissing the actual, you know, hate crimes and the actual violence.
Yeah, like, I mean, what do you like? What's the end goal to try and downplay it?
Yeah, right.
It's alarming, even if it's happening a little bit compared to before. It's still alarming.
Yeah, which is ironic because that's sort of the percentage game that a lot of the skeptic community comes down to in a lot of conversations around topics like Islam, where they'll say, like, oh, even if it's just 5%, it's a huge problem. Let's focus on it.
Exactly. Even if it's just a few Muslims that are jihadists, you know, the whole community is under suspicion.
Right. Yeah, I mean, okay, so let's say someone's listening to this and they're a fan of Sam Harris or they're a fan of Jordan Peterson, and they're hearing this and they're off-put, or maybe they've probably already turned it off, but I mean they're off-put or they're confused, but in some way let's just assume that they're open to being persuaded on some level. So like when you look at like a specific character assessment of somebody, so like say not even Sam Harris, say there's like a new character like a Sam Harris, what are some of the ways you keep track, I guess, and stay critical of characters as they evolve with their presence online?
Well, just like try to see if they're consistent to what they talk about all the time.
Yeah.
You know, that's really the basic way of trying to figure out if someone's really credible or not. Like the amount of times I found Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson or anyone in that scene to be so inconsistent to what they preach. It's ridiculous. That's why I can't take them seriously anymore. And don't take it from me. I mean, I came across a Reddit thread the other day, like of ex-Jordan Peterson fans, and they call themselves like, I think it was like the ex-Lobsters tank or something. And they all shared their stories of how they fell for Peterson. And it's always at a really depressing, like when they've just lost their job or just broken up with a woman, or, you know, been refused a promotion and a woman has gotten it instead. You know, these types of bitter moments where they fall for this crap. Yeah. And then slowly they realize, like, no, that's not working or helping, and they have to get out of it.
he's like the perfect prototype of someone who he has that life coach, Deepak Chopra
Someone
style.
who Sam Harris would have mocked
Right.
endlessly a few years ago.
Yep, but it's just the perfect cultish presence where he's like, he can lasso you in with how enthusiastic and charismatic he is about his ideas. And it's just funny because like there's even the people I know, a lot of the people I grew up with on the religious right who would fall into evangelical Christianity, like that category, they love a lot of what he puts out there.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to me because growing up in that community, which is more the personal one that I grew up in, like I know some people have more of like a secular or progressive experience, with like mine was very fundamentalist. And it's interesting to note that the people in my community that like what he's saying, if he were to actually be like a pastor or call himself a traditional Christian, they'd be burning him at the stake and calling him a heretic because...
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like that's probably one of the weirdest under talked about things about him as at what
why would they think he's a heretic though?
Well, because like the more right, I guess you go, like the more fundamentalist you get with Christianity, every little piece of how you interpret the Bible becomes super important. So I mean, even like young earth creationism, you know, and like taking old stories in the Bible as metaphorical truths, like that whole Joseph Campbell type of speech that Jordan Peterson loves. All that, like if you were a pastor at the churches that I grew up in saying that kind of thing, you would just be kicked out instantly because people have to take it either as close to literally as possible, or it has to maintain these boundaries of, okay, you believe, like if a pastor in my church growing up were to sit Jordan Peterson down and ask him directly, do you believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God who came to earth?
He won't answer.
He won't answer it. Exactly. But like, if he didn't answer it, he'd get kicked out of the church. Like, we need people that are in this sort of space of conservative Christianity, the people that they follow, as far as the pastors and the theologians that they're interested in, that's all of what they believe. So it's just really interesting how, in the same way, like there's this one character, this guy's name's Rob Bell. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a really popular Western evangelical preacher, and he basically got ostracized from the Christian church like 10 or 15 years ago for writing a book that the book basically framed the topic of hell as maybe hell isn't real, or like maybe hell isn't what we thought it was. And he got kicked out of the church just for suggesting it. So like...
But see, now, I guess they see how popular Peterson is in the mainstream, and they're happy to have someone fighting for those traditionalist values, making them more palatable in the mainstream, right?
That's the whole thing.
Same way, like there are Islamist mullahs who really like Peterson and admire his bullshit about, you know, we don't know if men and women can work together or not.
Yep.
They use his shit for promoting gender segregation, you know?
I was just talking to Shadi Hamid about that. He was telling me about he just came across some conservative Muslim group they were sharing Jordan Peterson videos and all that. Yeah. I was like, that's so indicative of everything we're saying here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also like that whole right-wing kind of letting your principles slide thing that I was talking about. They're happy to ally with someone that goes against a lot of what they believe in other ways if they're promoting something that they really care about.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, okay, just the way you talk about all this stuff, you keep it very light and you keep it very, you know, you can joke about and all that. So like from a mental and spiritual aspect of your life, how do you stay sane? Like, are there times you have to detach from all this, or do you see a therapist? Like, how do you work through a lot of it?
No, not the therapist part yet, but I definitely have to detach from social media sometimes. I don't have the energy to check in sometimes. Sometimes I just like draw and work on other projects, like do my freelance graphic design, which is a nice thing to take me away. So
just keep it light.
Just keep it light, because it does weigh on you after a while. And also all the hate mail, right? Like, there's only so much you can wake up to, you fucking cunt, bitch.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, just knowing how much of that I see online, how much of just the direct assaults and the direct threats and just all the hate speech from people, like, do you, like, I know you're, like I mentioned before, like, you just done that show with Michael Brooks and Sam Cedar and a lot of those characters. They do a great job, I feel like, of sort of trolling and keeping the humor
I
alive.
love it. Yeah.
You know, like how important do you think that is amidst all this to, like, use as a weapon?
It's so important. It's so important because especially the way that they do it, like jokingly and keeping it humorous, it's just, it brings some light into like all that hate, right?
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, Eiynah, you've been super generous with your time. I just want to close off with one question, which is just kind of the thing that I'm always circulating around in this whole conversation. It's just like, as we describe this whole movement and some of the individuals that are in it, and we go through like a lot of the cultural critiques that are to us glaringly obvious at this point, how do you not become like a Sam Harris who is just at this point instinctively deflecting all criticism, you know, and not acknowledging?
It's hard to be that into yourself if you don't have that kind of reinforcement and approval and culty following all the time. It keeps you grounded, right? It must be harder when you're rich and famous to stay grounded and not think the world of yourself and take criticism seriously.
So a lot of it's power, you think?
I think so. That definitely helps it grow.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, all right, cool. Well, thanks so much again for doing this. I'll plug in all your info in the show notes and everything. So do you got anything you're working on now that you want to plug?
No, nothing in specific. Just my podcast, Polite Conversations. Do check it out. Awesome.
Well, you've been the best, and I really, really appreciate just all the work that you've been putting into this. Even just this alone, you know, like everything else that you do on top of it, it's great. And keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Take care.
You too.